Hi there, and welcome back to another review. The film that I will be reviewing today is Wuthering Heights. For context, this film is directed and written by Fennell. It is heavily inspired by Emily Bronte's novel of the same name and originally published in 1847. Since its publication, the novel has inspired more than 35 film and television productions, and in accordance to the Motion Picture Association, or the MPA for short, this film has been given an R rating for sexual and violent content and language. The official runtime of this movie is coming in at 2 hours and 16 minutes. And with the background information out of the way, let's go ahead and jump right into what this film is about and provide context to what Fennell's intentions were when directing this film. This film, much like the novel, is marketed as, and I quote, a passionate and tumultuous love story set against the backdrop of the Yorkshire moors, exploring the intense and destructive relationship between Heathcliff and Catherine Earnshaw. The film is marketed as a love story, but anyone who is familiar with this novel knows that it's much more in line with that of a revenge story, akin to a tragedy, than a typical love story. According to BCC, director Fennell is quoted to have felt compelled to adapt Wuthering Heights because of a lifelong obsession with the novel, specifically aiming to recreate the intense, primal, and in her view, dirty emotional experience she had upon reading it at just 14 years of age. She would go on to describe the book as having cracked her open and wanting to explore the story's raw and apologetic and horrible aspects. The LA Times would go on to quote her as being a fanatical about the novel. In an interview with Rotten Tomatoes, Fennell openly provided context on why her film Wuthering Heights is titled with quotations around the title, a slight detail that you'd be forgiven if you missed. She intentionally treated this adaptation as a version of the story she remembers reading as a teenager, focused on the two main characters rather than a literal, comprehensive retelling. The public admission of omitting certain elements of the book and certain casting decisions left fans of the novel a bit cautious. And having seen the film, let's talk about what worked and whether or not Fennell's film delivers on what is promised, as well as what I liked and disliked about the film. Spoiler-free, of course. What I enjoyed. Well, you'll be hard-pressed to find anyone who wasn't impressed by the art style and cinematography of this film. At times, it truly felt like watching scenes of your greatest fantasy book come to life. The stormy weather, colorful backdrops, costume and set designs, albeit not always matching the time periods, were nonetheless great to see on screen. Aiding in this fantasy-like feeling was the attention and craftsmanship in the sound and score. Visually, this movie is definitely worth checking out and learning from, especially if you're looking to make a fantasy movie with the oohs and ahs that come with a fairy tale escapade. However, other than being occasionally pleasing to the eyes, there is plenty that I didn't particularly enjoy about this film. For starters, the two lead characters are substantially flawed, misguided, manipulative, and most importantly, trauma bonded. Instead, it's more about what happens if the trauma manifests and grows into something that can only be described as toxic. The story of Kathy and Heathcliff as presented is one with many flaws. As characters themselves, they don't necessarily have anything else in common other than physical attraction and shared traumas, leading to this powerful and often self-harming emotional connection that neither one can seem to shake despite the clear and obvious destructive tells littered before them. It goes without saying that pretty much every character that comes into contact with these two leads are substantially and negatively impacted in some way, shape, or form. And I get it, the two leads aren't supposed to be liked, but if there isn't anything else for me to chew on, whether it's subplots, thematic intrigue based on time periods, or the passionate and raw feelings of the two towards one another, then why should I be invested in this particular retelling of the story? And it's with the story in mind, the film begins with a provocative set of circumstances and depictions that lay the groundwork of what to expect. But having seen the film, I can say that the movie doesn't necessarily live up to those expectations and remains constrained to playing it close to the chest in terms of its aim to provoke and its aim to fulfill what is laid out in those first few opening scenes. The secondary characters of this film are also tragedies in their own rights, often finding themselves becoming worse versions of themselves as the film progresses. And while none of these characters have a whole lot to say in narrative focus, they do help mirror the two leads as fatally flawed individuals. While I have no doubts the context and subplots of the novel are littered with deeper meanings and more intricacies into character examinations, the movie itself felt a bit more fantasy-like than that of a film that was serious in addressing the surrounding context within the time period. The ultimate conclusion of the film plays out as well as you'd probably expect given the circumstances and parameters that the film lays out. I wouldn't say the ending is necessarily earned, despite having a general sense in where the film's destination would end up being. This is mostly due to the character motivations being a bit overemphasized and overplayed based on what was previously shown as their baseline. In the end, I couldn't wrap my head around why this version of Wuthering Heights needed to be told, as from what I can tell, it omitted much from what made the book such a profound and provocative piece of literature for its time. And as cliche as it sounds, if you're interested to see how much of the movie omits from the novel, I suggest you pick up a copy of the book and read it for yourself, as it provides much more context and character driven motivations than the movie attempts to address. In the end, I can't help but say I'm a bit perplexed to how to perceive this movie, let alone review this film. On one hand, it's a gorgeous film, but on the other, it's a film that aims at provocative heights with two lead characters that are incredibly flawed, but it misses out on the many opportunities to truly say something emotionally resonant beyond the basis of a trauma-bond tragedy, concluding with a story that feels a bit unresolved. And while the novel may have been better in its portrayal of Cathy and Heathcliff among the various subtexts of living within its time frame, the film adaptation as it stands is a bit of a letdown for me. As always, thanks for staying tuned and watching my take on this film. If you've read the book and have seen the film, please let me know what you thought about this latest adaptation, and whatever you think, let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you around on the next review. All right. Bye, guys.